Kofi Mensah stared at Soo-min Park across the hotel suite on their wedding night, his face twisted with something close to revulsion. His words came out cold and precise, each syllable designed to wound. I never wanted this marriage. Understand that now before you get any ideas about what this is. Soo-min stood there in the simple cream handbox she'd chosen for the ceremony, her hands folded calmly in front of her. She didn't cry, she didn't plead, she didn't even flinch. Instead, she walked to the bed, picked up her pillow and headed straight for the door. Where are you going? Kofi asked, more confused than concerned. The guest room, she replied without looking back. You want distance? I'm giving it to you. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Kofi stood there for a moment, waiting for her to come back, to knock, to do what he expected all women to do around him: chase, pursue, beg for his attention. 3 months later, he found himself standing outside that guest room door every single night, his forehead pressed against the wood, whispering apologies she wouldn't hear. If you love stories where the rejected becomes the prize, where the underestimated becomes undeniable, then listen closely. This tech billionaire thought his arranged wife would be desperate for his validation. He had no idea who he was dealing with. Soo-min Park never imagined her life would take this turn. At 27, she was a rising data scientist in Seoul, working for one of the top AI research firms in South Korea. She'd built her career on her own merit, publishing papers that caught international attention, speaking at conferences, creating a future with her own brilliance and determination. Then her father's export business collapsed after a series of bad investments and currency fluctuations. What had been a comfortable middle-class life became a nightmare of debt collectors and bankruptcy notices. The shame of it nearly destroyed her father, a proud man who'd worked his entire life to give his family stability. That's when the Mensah family entered the picture, specifically Kofi Mensah. Kofi was 33, the heir to a vast technology and real estate empire built by his Ghanaian father and Korean mother. He'd grown up between Accra and Seoul, educated at the best international schools, groomed to take over $1 billion conglomerate. He had everything: wealth, influence, a face that belonged on magazine covers, and a reputation for cold brilliance in business. But he had one significant problem. His late father's will contained an ironclad provision. If Kofi didn't marry by his 35th birthday, controlling interest in the company would transfer to a board of trustees. His father had believed that marriage would ground him, give him responsibility beyond profit margins. Kofi had 2 months left, and he'd spent years refusing to commit to anyone, burning through relationships with models and celebrities like they were quarterly reports. The families saw an opportunity that benefited both sides. Kofi needed a wife immediately. Soo-min's family needed financial salvation. A marriage would solve everything, a merger of convenience signed and sealed like any other business contract. It had nothing to do with love or compatibility. It was transaction, pure and simple. Soo-min's father came to her apartment one rainy evening, his shoulders bent with shame, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He sat at her small kitchen table and asked her to save them all, to marry this man she'd never met, to sacrifice her own dreams so the family wouldn't drown. What could she say? These were the people who'd raised her, who'd sacrificed for her education, who'd believed in her when she wanted to pursue science instead of a traditional path. So she agreed, even as everything inside her screamed that this was wrong, that she was worth more than this. The wedding took place on a grey Wednesday morning at a private chapel in Seoul. There were no celebrations, no joy, no pretense that this was anything other than a legal arrangement. Kofi arrived in a perfectly tailored black suit, his jaw set, his eyes hard as obsidian. He barely glanced at Soo-min during the brief ceremony. When the officiant said they could kiss, Kofi gave her the most perfunctory peck on the forehead, the kind of gesture you'd give a distant aunt you were obligated to acknowledge. His family stood in the front row, his mother's face a mask of polite disapproval, his younger sister openly scrolling through her phone. After the ceremony, while they were in the side room signing documents, Soo-min overheard Kofi's cousin talking to his brother. The words sliced through her like broken glass. He just has to wait it out for a year, maybe 2, then divorce her quietly. That's the whole plan. Kofi was standing right there, adjusting his watch, and he said nothing. He didn't correct them. He didn't defend her, he acted like she didn't exist. In that moment, Soo-min understood exactly what she was to him, a checkbox on his inheritance requirements. A problem solved, nothing more. They drove to his penthouse in Gangnam in complete silence. The building was obscene in its luxury, all imported Italian marble and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River. Kofi led her through the massive space without a single word, finally stopping at the master bedroom. It was stunning, decorated with minimalist elegance that probably cost more than her family's entire debt. but his voice was ice when he finally spoke. The arrangement is straightforward. We live separate lives. No expectations of affection or companionship. This is business. We'll appear together when necessary for family obligations or company functions. Otherwise, I expect you to stay out of my way. I have my work, you can do whatever you want with your time. Just don't interfere with mine. Soo-min stood there absorbing every cold word. She'd expected this, had prepared herself for it, but hearing it stated so bluntly still left a hollow ache in her chest. Kofi turned to walk toward his study, clearly considering the conversation finished. But then Soo-min did something he didn't anticipate. She walked past the master bedroom down the hallway to the guest room. It was smaller, simpler, but it would be entirely hers. Kofi stopped, turning around with a frown. "What are you doing? You said separate lives," Soo-min replied calmly, meeting his eyes directly for the first time that day. "If we're maintaining distance, let's truly maintain it. This arrangement works better for both of us." She could see surprise flash across his handsome face. He'd expected her to take the master bedroom, to play the role of his wife even in this hollow marriage. But Soo-min was done playing roles she didn't audition for. If he wanted distance, she'd give him an ocean of it. She stepped into the guest room and closed the door firmly. A moment later, she turned the lock. The click echoed in the hallway like a small declaration of independence. That first week established the pattern for everything that followed. Soo-min created her own routine, completely separate from Kofi's existence. She woke at 5 in the morning, went to the building's state-of-the-art gym, and left the penthouse before Kofi even stirred. She'd accepted a position at a prestigious international consulting firm that specialized in AI implementation for major corporations, and she threw herself into the work with fierce dedication. She came home late, ate simple meals alone in her room while reading research papers, and fell asleep with her laptop still open beside her. Kofi would sometimes pass her in the kitchen or hallway, and they'd nod at each other like polite strangers sharing an elevator. Nothing more. Kofi had expected something entirely different. In his experience, women pursued him relentlessly. They wanted his attention, his time, his validation. They made themselves available, made themselves indispensable. But Soo-min wanted absolutely nothing from him, and that was unprecedented in his world. He found himself noticing small details about her. How she drank her coffee with just a touch of honey, no milk. How she was always respectful to his housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, learning about her grandchildren and remembering their names. How she'd leave for work every morning dressed in sharp professional attire, looking like she commanded boardrooms, and how she never once tried to engage him in conversation beyond basic politeness. By the second month, something had shifted. Soo-min wasn't just surviving this arrangement. She was flourishing. Her new position was exceeding all expectations. She was impressing senior partners with her innovative approaches to machine learning applications. She was making connections with influential figures in the tech industry. She joined exclusive professional organizations and started speaking at international conferences again. Her confidence grew with each passing day, and it radiated from her like light. She'd come home sometimes still on video calls, laughing at something a colleague said. Kofi would be in his study and hear her voice, bright and genuine and full of life, and something uncomfortable would twist in his chest like a knife turning slowly. One evening, Kofi was working late when he heard Soo-min come in around 10 at night. She was on her phone, her voice warm and animated. "No, that was absolutely brilliant. You really presented it that way to the board." She laughed, that real unguarded laugh he'd never heard directed at him. "Okay, I'll see you at the strategy meeting tomorrow. Thanks for dinner tonight, James, it was really lovely." Kofi's hands froze on his keyboard. James? Who the hell was James? He found himself walking out of his study before he could think better of it, intercepting Soo-min in the hallway. "Who was that?" he asked, and the words came out sharper than he'd intended. Soo-min looked at him calmly, not startled or guilty, just completely indifferent, a colleague from work. "We had a business dinner, not that it concerns you." She walked past him toward her room and Kofi stood there feeling like a complete fool. She was absolutely right. They'd agreed on separate lives. He had no right to question anything she did. But the image of her laughing with someone else, someone who clearly made her happy, lodged in his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. The breaking point came at a major investors' gala that they were required to attend together as a couple. Kofi was accustomed to these events, usually bored by the predictable conversations and networking. But then Soo-min emerged from her room in a deep blue hanbok-inspired gown that had been modernized with contemporary lines, and his heart actually stopped beating for a moment. She'd styled her hair differently, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders, and she looked absolutely radiant. Not like a wife he was obligated to have, but like a woman who could captivate anyone in any room. At the gala, Kofi witnessed something he'd never seen before. People gravitated towards Soo-min naturally. Men and women both sought her out, not because she was Kofi Mensah's wife, but because she was magnetic in her own right. She was brilliant, discussing artificial intelligence ethics and data privacy regulations with more insight than most of the tech executives present. She was engaging, making people laugh with her quick wit and thoughtful observations. She was genuine, authentically interested in what others had to say, asking questions that showed she actually listened. Kofi found himself standing alone with a drink, watching his wife become the most compelling person at the event, and feeling something he'd never experienced before. Jealousy. Real, burning, consuming jealousy. Then James Morrison appeared. Young, successful venture capitalist with an MBA from Stanford and a smile that was too easy, too charming. He approached Soo-min with obvious interest, and Kofi watched her face light up with recognition. They talked for 20 minutes and Kofi counted every agonizing second. He watched James lean in close, watched him make Soo-min laugh, watched him look at her like she was the only person worth seeing in a room full of powerful people. Finally, Kofi couldn't endure it anymore. He walked over and placed his hand on Soo-min's lower back possessively. The first time he'd touched her since their wedding day. "That's my wife," he said to James, his voice sharp with an edge he couldn't control. James looked between them, then at Kofi with something that looked almost like pity. "You're a lucky man, Kofi. Your wife is extraordinary." The emphasis on your wife made it painfully clear what James thought, that Kofi didn't deserve her, hadn't earned her, couldn't possibly appreciate what he had. The drive home was tense and suffocating with silence. Kofi's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. Finally, he broke. "You seemed very comfortable with James Morrison." Soo-min turned to look at him and her voice was calm but cutting like a surgical blade. "He was kind to me. He treated me like I mattered. Something you wouldn't understand." She went straight to her room when they arrived home and locked the door. Kofi stood in that hallway staring at the closed door, feeling something crack open inside his chest like an earthquake. For the first time since their wedding, he truly understood what he'd done. He'd married an extraordinary woman and treated her like she was beneath him. And now she'd built an entire life that didn't need him at all. She'd become someone remarkable, and he'd missed all of it because of his arrogance. The third month was absolute torture for Kofi. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He'd lie in his enormous bed and know she was just down the hall, close enough to reach in 30 steps, but a million miles away in every way that mattered. He started timing his mornings to accidentally encounter her in the kitchen. He'd leave his study door open when he heard her footsteps, hoping she'd stop to talk. She never did. He asked Mrs. Kim casual questions about Soo-min's day, and the housekeeper would give him knowing looks that made him feel pathetic. Kofi tried everything he could think of. He suggested they have dinner together for the sake of appearances. Soo-min politely declined. She had plans. He offered to provide additional funding for her father's business beyond what their agreement required. She refused firmly. We had a deal. The marriage was sufficient. He attempted compliments, stumbling over words like an awkward teenager. "You look nice today." She'd thank him flatly and continue walking. Every rejection made him more desperate, more aware of what he'd thrown away. Then Kofi saw it on the shared household calendar that Mrs. Kim maintained. Soo-min had lunch scheduled with James Morrison. Something inside him snapped completely. He showed up at the restaurant uninvited, walked directly to their table and sat down without asking. Soo-min's face went from surprised to mortified to absolutely furious in the span of seconds. James excused himself awkwardly, clearly sensing the tension, and Soo-min didn't say a single word until they were in the car. Then she exploded. "You don't get to do this. You made it crystal clear that I meant nothing to you. You looked at me with disgust on our wedding night. You told me to stay out of your way, to not interfere with your life. So I did exactly what you asked. I built a life without you, a good life, and now you're upset because I'm not chasing you. Because I'm not begging for scraps of your attention like you expected." Her voice broke just slightly, and Kofi saw tears forming in her eyes for the first time since he'd known her. "I don't need you, Kofi. I never did. I'm perfectly fine on my own. Better than fine, actually." She got out of the car before he could respond and went straight to her room. Kofi sat in the garage for over an hour, her words playing on repeat in his head like a song he couldn't escape. She was absolutely right about everything. He'd been cruel, dismissive, arrogant. He'd treated her like she was worthless when the truth was the exact opposite. Soo-min was stronger, smarter, more genuine than anyone he'd ever known. And he'd been too proud and stupid and blind to see what was right in front of him. That night, Kofi stood outside her door for a long time before he finally found his voice. Soo-min, please, can we talk, just for a moment? Silence answered him. He slid down the wall and sat on the floor, his back against her door like a supplicant at a temple. Then he started talking, pouring out everything he'd been holding inside. He told her how wrong he'd been about everything. How his pride had blinded him to reality. How he'd been threatened by her from the very beginning because she didn't need him, didn't worship him like everyone else in his life did. I thought I was too good for you, he whispered to the door. The truth is I'm not good enough for you. You're everything I'm not. You're strong and kind and real. And now I can't sleep knowing you're so close but completely unreachable. I can't focus on work. I can't think about anything except how badly I destroyed this before it even started. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see you now, really see you, and what I see is remarkable. For a long time there was only silence on the other side of the door. Then he heard her voice, quiet and broken. You shattered something in me that first night, Kofi. I know, he whispered back, his throat tight with emotion. I don't know if I can trust you, not after everything. Let me earn it, he said desperately. However long it takes, years if necessary, I'll prove it to you every single day. Just don't give up on this yet, please don't give up on me. The door stayed locked that night, but the next morning Kofi discovered that Soo-min had left her door unlocked. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close. But it wasn't a wall either. It was a crack, the smallest possibility. Kofi showed up every single day after that. He made coffee exactly how she liked it, with honey stirred in carefully, and left it for her with small notes. I was paying attention, even when you thought I wasn't. He asked about her work and actually listened to her answers, asking follow-up questions that proved he genuinely cared. When his mother made a condescending comment about Soo-min at a family dinner, calling her opportunistic, Kofi cut her off sharply. Speak about my wife with respect or don't speak at all. We're leaving. His mother's face went pale with shock. Kofi had never stood up to her before, had always prioritized family harmony over everything else. But things had changed. He had changed, or at least he was desperately trying to. Soo-min noticed everything. How could she not? But she kept her guard up, her walls still high. She'd been hurt too deeply to just let it dissolve because of coffee and kind words. Trust wasn't rebuilt with grand gestures. It was rebuilt with consistency, with showing up day after day. Then Kofi did something that changed everything between them. He'd overheard Soo-min talking to her best friend on the phone one evening about her dream of starting her own AI ethics consulting firm someday, something focused on helping developing nations implement technology responsibly. So Kofi made it happen, not in his name, but entirely in hers. He found the perfect office space in a building near Gangnam Station. He handled all the business licensing and registration. He even connected her with potential clients in Ghana and South Korea who needed exactly what she could offer. Then he presented it all to her one evening, a folder full of documents and keys. Soo-min stared at everything, tears filling her eyes. Why, she whispered. Why now, after everything you said, everything you did? Kofi looked at her with complete honesty, more vulnerable than he'd ever been. Because I finally see you. Really see you, Soo-min, and I'm in love with you. Not because you're my wife on paper, not because of any arrangement. Because you're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever encountered. And I was too blind and arrogant to see it before. I wasted so much time. Soo-min's tears spilled over, but she shook her head firmly. Love isn't a word you say, Kofi, it's action, it's consistency, it's showing up when it's difficult. If you mean this, truly mean it, you need to prove it every single day for as long as it takes. And I'm keeping the guest room until I decide I'm ready. Done, Kofi said immediately without hesitation. I'll wait as long as it takes. No pressure, no demands, no expectations. Just let me show you who I can be. And he did exactly that. Week after week, month after month, Kofi proved himself. He remembered her important meetings and asked thoughtful questions about how they went. He supported her business launch, helping behind the scenes with connections and advice, but never trying to control it or take credit. He respected her boundaries completely, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He learned to cook traditional Ghanaian dishes from his grandmother to surprise her. He attended her conference presentations and sat in the audience beaming with pride. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, Soo-min's walls began to come down brick by brick. 4 months later, on a quiet Saturday evening, Kofi was reading in the master bedroom when he heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. He looked up to see Soo-min standing in the doorway, her pillow clutched in her arms. She looked nervous, vulnerable in a way he'd never witnessed before. Can I come in? She asked softly. Kofi's throat closed up completely with emotion. He couldn't speak, couldn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. Soo-min walked into the room carefully and set her pillow down on the other side of the bed. Then she climbed in and curled up, still keeping some distance between them but present in the same space. "You fell first," she said quietly, a small smile playing at her lips. Kofi reached over carefully and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers, and harder, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," Soo-min said, squeezing his hand back. "That's how it should be." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they fell asleep in the same room. Not because they had to, not because of any obligation or arrangement, but because they chose to. Because somewhere along the difficult journey, a marriage that started as a business transaction had transformed into something real and precious. Kofi had thought she needed him, needed his wealth and status and name. It turned out he was the one who couldn't breathe without her, who'd been slowly suffocating in his own arrogance until she'd shown him what real strength looked like. And now that he had her trust, now that she'd chosen him after everything, he'd never take a single moment for granted again. He'd spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of the extraordinary woman who taught him what love actually meant. And that's how you make someone regret underestimating you, not through revenge or bitterness, but by becoming so undeniably remarkable that they can't look away. Soo-min knew her worth from the beginning and never compromised it for anyone. She didn't need validation from the man who'd rejected her. She built her own empire, her own happiness, her own life. And in doing so, she became the prize he'd never deserved but would spend forever trying to earn. Don't forget to subscribe K-MELANIN TV.